For a long time, I ran a short-term rental home on Airbnb. Keeping up with it while also focusing on my day job became too much of a burden, so I stopped. If your home is booked frequently through Airbnb, you have the potential to earn much more money than you would by renting it out in the traditional manner. We were in a popular tourist area, so Airbnb was a great choice for us. At first, my wife and I were very enthusiastic, but as more people booked the house, we found that it became increasingly demanding. After the first customers left and before the second set arrived, we needed to hire cleaning services and keep things running smoothly while also promptly answering their messages and emails. But for a few years, everything was fine until we had what we thought was a young couple living with us. Like as usual, I texted them the door's unlock code when they arrived. Rarely do I get to interact with customers directly. After they assured me that everything was fine on the inside, I was able to kick back and enjoy the rest of my day off. It's important to note that I rarely engaged in conversation with customers beyond a couple of texts. They usually just let me know when they arrive and depart via text, and occasionally ask me a question or two about the house. The young man staying at the house texted me right as I was getting ready for bed at 9 o'clock. It was brief. He said he would call me in a minute, and he did so exactly 1 minute later. Even though I had a bad feeling upon reading the text, his words caught me off guard. He claimed the home's water system was malfunctioning. Of course, I apologized, though I didn't see how that could be possible. But I knew I couldn't let them stay without water for long. I needed to get a quick look at it so I could schedule maintenance for the following morning. He graciously consented, and I made my way there shortly thereafter. As I turned into the driveway, I saw 2 vehicles there. This didn't raise any red flags for me at the time. Rather, it struck me as peculiar because they appeared to be a young couple on a one-night getaway, and I couldn't fathom why they would need 2 cars. Even though I knew it was against the rules for someone to visit them, I didn't mind it so much. I went to the entrance and knocked, then entered the keypad code and went inside. There was utter silence. They weren't where I would have guessed them to be, and that was a major letdown. I should have looked for them first, but I was exhausted and just wanted to get this done. First, I went down to the basement and checked the main water valve to make sure there wasn't a leak or a flood. There was no visible damage or water, and everything looked normal. Initially perplexed, I tinkered with the valve and heard the familiar sound of water rushing again. I gave it a good twist and saw that the power was completely cut off by hand. Since I didn't see anyone when I entered the basement, I stayed for another minute trying to figure out what was going on down there before I started to feel uneasy. Because I couldn't imagine anyone else turning off the water, I assumed they were intentionally trying to get me to come over, or at the very least, offer them a discount on their stay. I got up to go get in my car and dial their number again, just to be sure, when I heard the basement door open and several pairs of footsteps heading down. I got to my feet and headed that way. When they reached the bottom, they saw 3 men waiting for them. All of these men were much older than the young man I had assumed was staying at the house. But when one of them asked, "Is it fixed?" he sounded exactly like the man I had spoken to on the phone. I told him the valve probably just tightened itself and that they should be good to go now. I didn't want to start pointing fingers because I was already feeling uneasy, but I did want to get out of the basement and away from these men. After that, nobody said a word. They just stared at me in silence. Walking between them, I said, "Well, let me know if you need anything else." I was heading for the stairwell. They just stood there, staring at me as I walked by, but as I passed the 3rd guy nearest the stairs, I noticed he had a gun stuffed down his pants. I got scared and started running up the stairs faster, but they didn't follow. They stayed in the cellar, while I hurriedly got in my car and left. I arrived home and immediately woke up the wife to inform her of the situation. I was persuaded by her to contact the authorities to check on them. They weren't who we expected to be staying there, but given the circumstances, it made sense. We waited for about 20 minutes before the police officer called to say that nobody answered their door, and he might need me to let himself in. Instead, I provided him with the code, and 20 minutes later, he called to report that nobody seemed to be around. The next day, we learned that the man's credit card had been stolen, and a search of the house revealed that several high-priced items had also been taken. No young couple ever existed, I take it. The only thing that wasn't clarified was how they expected the water situation to play out. I guessed that they were either planning to rob me at gunpoint or wanted me to waive the cost of their stay so they could keep using the stolen card. Now, I'm wondering why they didn't do it. After leading me into a trap and blocking my exit with 3 unknown men in the basement, they just let me go. Inexplicably, after that incident, I avoided the Airbnb rental while guests were present, and a few months later, we stopped using the service altogether and listed the home for traditional rental. Last year, I went to Salt Lake City on my own. In the past, I hadn't been able to take many vacations, and the few that I had were always spent with my family. I was looking forward to spending some time away from home for the first time by myself. It may sound strange, but I enjoy my time alone and often wish I had more of it. After researching local hotels and Airbnb, I was surprised to find that the latter were significantly nicer and more affordable. The cheapest ones, however, were always outside of town. Since I had my transportation, the distance to the city was of little concern, and I chose a spacious Airbnb. It was tiny, but I didn't care as long as the kitchen and bedroom were nice. On a Sunday morning, I arrived at 6. I was able to get inside after the owners sent me the code on my phone. It was fantastic, far superior to the cramped apartment that my roommate and I had previously shared. After bringing everything inside, I sat down on the couch and turned on the television. After a 10-hour drive, all I wanted to do was relax and take in the night's tranquility. Even though it was only around 7 o'clock, I managed to fall asleep rather quickly. However, my body woke me up a few hours later. It had been a little while since 10 o'clock, and the TV was still on. I got up to turn off the TV and grab a glass of water before retiring to bed. An early strong cold breeze hit me as I walked from the living room to the kitchen. I blinked my bleary eyes and saw the front door was wide open. I blinked my eyes open and felt my heart race. I stood looking at the entrance for a while before turning to survey the interior. This was terrifying because I was sure I had shut it and locked it. Walking over, I closed the door gently while listening carefully for any signs of life inside. I'm not the biggest guy in the world, but I'm pretty fit, and I felt like I could easily push an intruder away from the house unless they had a gun. Still keeping my silence, I went through the house checking every room with a kitchen knife. No one was around. This only served to perplex me further, so I texted the homeowner to inquire as to whether or not anyone was scheduled to arrive tonight. However, given the hour, I didn't anticipate hearing back from them anytime soon. I went through the house and locked every door, then did a quick second sweep while fully awake. The fatigue had not yet lifted. I got into bed and had no trouble dozing off. Even though I went to sleep feeling peaceful, when I awoke, I was anything but. I thought I heard a noise outside. It was right outside my bedroom door, inside the house. I was at a loss for action and stood there frozen, waiting for the person or people outside the room to take the initiative. I sat in bed, wondering how the intruder could have gotten in. Since only the homeowner would know the door's password, I was sure it was him at the time. This gave me confidence, as I reasoned that it must be a creepy guy who enjoys spying on the guests of his Airbnb. Not hearing anything else, I got out of bed and picked up my phone from the nightstand to dial 911. Someone must have heard me coming because they started running away from the door and toward the front of the house almost immediately. Knowing the intruder was so close to the door made me feel even more threatened. I called the police, but nothing happened while I was waiting for them to arrive. Someone had already left. For the rest of my trip, I stayed in a hotel, but the Airbnb host was so convinced it wasn't him that he refunded my money. He was a sweet old man who cared deeply about what had transpired. It was disturbing enough when I assumed it was the proprietor, but now that I know it was just some random guy, it's downright unsettling. It still gives me the creeps to think about how he got in and why he was stalking me. The most memorable part was opening my eyes and seeing the front door swing open. Now that I know someone was home, I can assume they came in while I was sleeping on the couch and did whatever it was they came to do. Just the thought of staying at an Airbnb on my own gives me the creeps. During my trip last year, I stayed at a modest Airbnb with 2 bedrooms. This was just a stopover for the night on the way to another Airbnb, where I planned to spend the bulk of my trip. As I had anticipated, the place was tidy and devoid of other people when I arrived. Before bringing in my luggage and settling in on the couch, I walked around the entire house to get a feel for it. It was already late in the evening, perhaps 8:00. The doorbell rang just as I was beginning to nod off. In bewilderment and alarm, I glanced toward the entrance. Due to my small stature as a child, I am naturally wary of strangers and prefer to keep to myself, particularly late at night when I am by myself. 2 men could be heard whispering behind the door, so I got up and went to check it out. Since there was no other way to secure the door, I simply kept it closed and yelled, "Hello? We're just checking out the Airbnb. Man, what's the deal with the door?" one man yelled. I had no idea what being here for Airbnb was supposed to mean, so I asked loudly what it meant. After being asked, he replied that he already had a reservation. There had to be a mix-up, so I shouted through the door to tell him that I had also booked it and that he should talk to the owner. The man didn't seem pleased, and I suppose I would be too if I were in his shoes. I heard one set of feet leave the doorway, while the other man politely asked once more if we could talk outside. I almost gave in and put my hand on the doorknob, because I thought he was credible. But then I had a sudden thought to just play it safe. I promised that my husband would be there in a few minutes to help us figure it out. I figured that if something bad happened, he wouldn't expect me to be alone and would react more quickly. However, the man remained silent. No one's footsteps could be heard leaving, so I waited another minute before pulling aside the thin curtain and peering through the tiny opening. The man I thought I was talking to was facing his parked car in the driveway, and beyond him was the most terrifying sight I've ever witnessed. Further down the driveway, a smaller group of maybe 5 people stood in ambush, seemingly waiting for a signal. They were all wearing masks of one kind or another, and though I couldn't see who was on the other side of the door, I had to assume there was a sizable group. Because of the city I was in, I knew this was probably a gang, and I was terrified. In a full-blown panic, I retreated from the door while desperately trying to control my breathing. As I walked to my bedroom to retrieve my phone and dial 911, I became aware of the sound of additional footfalls throughout the house. It felt as though a pack of wolves were surrounding me, any moment ready to break through the windows and attack. To keep my composure, I dialed 911 on my phone while in the restroom. The operator reassured me that help was on the way and told me to remain calm until it arrived. I stayed on the line until I heard the horrible sound of wood bending and then snapping from the front door, at which point I hung up. The tears were streaming down my face, and I covered my mouth with my hand. As a crowd of people sprinted inside, I heard them all rummage through cabinets and drawers before anyone even tried the bathroom door's handle. He shouted in here and walked away. When they heard sirens in the distance, the group scattered and continued looting the house. By the time the police arrived, they had already left, and my luggage and vehicle had been looted, damaged, and vandalized. When one of the officers sat down with me to talk, he explained that there had been issues with gangs breaking into homes, since they believe the primary objective is not to harm the residents, but rather to rob them blind. I can assume they left me alone in the restroom when they realized I posed no threat. It was terrifying regardless of whether or not they intended to harm me. Even though I know it probably had nothing to do with my staying at the Airbnb that night, I still get nervous whenever I book a stay there.